Many years ago, my then husband was transferred by his company, Western Atlantic, to Quanah, Texas, a town with a population of almost 5,000 people. The transfer was intended to help him advance to a manager's position, making the move a temporary one of about 3 years. Although the plant in Quanah was smaller, it held significant geographical importance. My twins were born in Quanah, and we made local news as the first twins born in the new hospital, earning a spot on the front page of the newspaper. Quanah appeared to us as an up-and-coming community, full of vibrancy from the strong support for school sports teams, artist groups, and especially the prominent church groups. I found it odd that the first question locals asked when meeting us was, "What church do you belong to?" It was never, "What does your husband do?" or "Where are you from?" or even, "What is your name?" The focus was always on which church we would be attending in that small community. We made many friends during our time in Quanah. My husband, naturally, connected with his co-workers, often spending half the night drinking with them. Meanwhile, I became involved with the Art Guild, a creative group that gathered to challenge and inspire each other. We organized art exhibits to showcase our talents and occasionally invited renowned artists to town for receptions to introduce them to the community. One such artist I remember well was Plains Indian painter Rance Hood, who was just beginning to rise to fame at the time. After my husband's training stint was over, we moved to another part of the country and started over making friends and settling in. That was many years and many changes ago. Now my children are grown with children of their own. And best of all, I have a new husband, one who is interested in my life, which is why I suggested a return visit to Quanah, Texas, while we were traveling in our RV through Texas to get to Houston to visit my son. He was game, and we found an RV park with an amiable office worker who brought us up to date about the community. The biggest news was that Georgia Pacific had just shut its doors for good 2 months prior. Whoa, that was big news, as it had been the biggest industry around. What did that say for the town, I wondered, soon seeing that the population had declined considerably since I had lived there so many years ago. As we took a drive around the town to see the familiar sights and get a sense of what had changed, I was stunned by the unfamiliarity of the community and its changes. Not only did I not see anything that looked familiar, but the whole town looked empty and dead. There were people, but they seemed unanimated, as if living in a dream world where their participation was minimal. The lovely houses I'd remembered were now empty and rotting away, one after another, including one I had lived in back in the day. What had happened to this community? I wanted to know. It was obvious that time had not been kind. Perhaps it was the power of suggestion from my husband's comment. I've never seen such a ghost town as this. Or maybe it was the fact that the place was indeed a true ghost town, complete with its haunts that made me quiver. I'm not sure. But as we drove down street after street, seeing the many empty and forlorn houses that were neglected by humans, yet overly nurtured by Mother Nature with overgrowth and decay, I couldn't help but feel that we were more in a twilight zone rather than in a town where I had once lived and enjoyed being in. To top off the disquiet of my insides and their churning feelings that said, "Things just ain't right in this village, my dear," we went to a newly made into a restaurant train station for dinner, which was across the highway from where we were staying. The building was refurbished nicely with a Cowboys and Indians theme, specifically of Chief Quanah Parker, the last chief of the Comanche and namesake of the town. There were pictures of Chief Quanah Parker on the walls, paintings, drawings, and photographs. along with headdresses and other chief-like apparel on display that kept my interest while we waited for dinner to arrive. And then, when my husband, at one point, left to go to the baño, while I waited, I sat looking around at the building and the items on the wall when movement caught the corner of my eye to my left. When I turned my head to zero in on what had caught my attention, my eyes locked on the drawing of Chief Quanah Parker that hung to the right of an old photo of the man. The photo was dark and damaged with details I couldn't decipher from where I sat. But the drawing was excellently drawn in pencil with great details. And it was those details that had my attention. The serious face, with a straight mouth and not quite a scowl, was smiling at me. Eyes that had been looking forward were now turned in my direction. That can't be possible, I told myself. It's a drawing, after all. But there was no mistake. Quanah Parker was looking at me and smiling. When my husband returned, I told him to look at the drawing to see if he saw what I was seeing. He said he saw a smile, but then in a moment said that the drawing of the Indian chief looked serious as it stared out into the room. I saw that too at that moment. But when my husband turned away and I looked again, the face was once again smiling and watching me. At one point, he even pursed his lips in kiss mode. I told my husband to hurry and turned to look, but the face, once again, had returned to its normal position and serious look. Was I seeing things? It couldn't have been from what I had been drinking, because the place didn't serve alcohol, and we had just ordered water. I kept looking over at the picture, hoping to see it for what it was, what it had been when we first entered the room. But each time I looked, it would change. The face would turn to look at me, and either smile or purse his lips in a kiss. I don't have validation for this happening, since my husband didn't see all that I saw. But I am certain I was not hallucinating. The town was turning into something beyond normal, either by regressing into its beginnings or moldering into a future state of nothingness. I was convinced, as I gave a definite shudder. Later, after dining and we stood to leave, the drawing suddenly dropped to the floor. Startled, we both turned to look. We were surprised that it had fallen, but even more surprised when seeing that the glass, miraculously, had not shattered. The owner, whom we met when we were served dinner, came running over with apologies for the noise and said, "It's the darndest thing. That has been happening a lot lately." During the 1800s, Indianola, Texas, was a thriving, bustling port city that could rival the likes of Galveston and New Orleans. But Mother Nature has plans of her own when it comes to coastal cities in Texas. Two massive hurricanes in 1875 and 1886 wiped most of the city off the map. And to add insult to injury, the parts of the town that weren't washed away in the storms were burnt down in a horrific fire. Those who survived, mostly German immigrants, moved up the coastline to settle a new city, leaving behind the remains of a once great town. Legend has it that the hurricane ravaged and burnt ruins are still haunted to this day by the victims who lost their lives in the downfall of Indianola. There have been claims that the dead still walk the ancient wreckage as if continuing with their everyday lives before tragedy struck their town. Some even report hearing whispers at night from long-dead ghosts, doomed to haunt the past on the rocky shores of Indianola. The forgotten ghost town of Independence. The town of Independence had all the makings of a historic destination that could stand the test of time back in the 1800s. Not only was it named after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the small town was also home to Sam Houston and the original Baylor University. But the original townsfolk's love of learning and patriotism wasn't enough to save it from decline. The construction of the college was halted indefinitely due to economic decline, eventually moved to Waco. All that's left is the ruins of the Baylor Female Building. Its ghost town fate was sealed by poorly planned railroad tracks that circumvented the town, driving business and families out in search of more prosperous living. Today, nearby locals claim the forgotten town lay on a convergence of electromagnetic fields, believing this too contributed to its demise. Legend has it, the land causes sleeplessness, headaches, and even hallucinations. One man even claims he experienced visions of long-dead loved ones when he was lost and came upon the ruins of Independence, Texas. The mysteriously abandoned ghost town of Toyah, Texas. Though the town's census, as of 2010, still boasted a whopping 90 citizens living in Toyah, Texas, not a living soul is often found walking the streets of this ghost town. Many of the structures still stand, filled with furniture just collecting dust, including a bank, whole houses, a grocery store, and towering high school. But nobody seems to know why the town was suddenly abandoned. There are a few stories floating around from ghost town enthusiasts who have traveled to Toyah to photograph the abandoned anomaly. Many have said they've seen a bizarre sphere of light hovering at night through the darkened streets. Several of those who have witnessed the mysterious orb immediately developed health issues after the sighting. Some equate the town's inexplicable vanishing to this light phenomenon. Visions of death in the ghost town of Paducah. Another Texas town whose death is still a mystery is Paducah in northwest Texas. Not unlike Toyah, the town has been abandoned, leaving fully inhabitable structures, with the exception of a few collapsed brick buildings. The husk that remains proves that, not long ago, the small town was bustling with cafes, pharmacies, a movie theater, some department stores, a grand hotel, and more. But it appears as if in a single moment, the entire population just up and vanished. The town continues to haunt and fascinate tourists, including one student who had a horrifying encounter. While visiting Paducah, the student said the empty town was completely still until she spotted a tall figure rounding a corner up the street. Hoping to get an interview, she followed the person, only to encounter something not of this world. She claims the figure, hooded in darkness, stood taller and thinner than any human, and she immediately knew the stranger wandering the abandoned town alone was death itself. Believing the town of Paducah's abandonment had something to do with the arrival of the soulless, sinister visitor. Barstow, Texas. No one would have expected the prosperous farming town of Barstow to inevitably end up a haunted ghost town back in the 1800s when it was 1,000 people strong. However, in 1904, after the Pecos River Dam broke, severe droughts demolished all of the crops and devastated the Barstow economy. Now, the dried-up town exists only in the form of memories, dilapidated buildings, and a dark legend that surrounds it with mystique. Many claim to have witnessed a group of robed specters whose feet never touch the ground, floating around the dead town of Barstow. Nobody knows what they are or what they want. Some think they are heavenly bodies, while others believe they are members of the occult. They've been spotted hovering over surrounding fields, apparently congregating and conversing without making sound.